Is academic research only allowed to analyze the world, or can it also change the world? As Julia Wittmeier and Katharina Hölscher note in a study from 2017, for several years there has been an increasing, I quote, call in the social and natural science for transformation research that addresses the growing global problem pressure and contributes to understanding as well as supporting sustainability transformations. End of quotation. However, this is not limited to the topic of sustainability. In other fields too, there is a call for transformative research approaches to improve living conditions and empower social actors. Unlike in the natural and social science, there is almost no tradition of transformative approaches in the cultural science and humanities, and especially in media studies. There are indeed historical transformation analyses, i.e. analysis of historical change in culture and society, but they have not yet been further developed to guide action. Similarly, studies of documentary films have hardly contributed to a change in research approaches. Also, there are models for transformative approaches in the field of documentary. Examples include socially engaged documentary films, beginning with John Grierson and Jigar Vertov, ethnographically used documentary films, and recent participatory and collaboratively organized web documentaries and iDocs. Inspired by these projects, in recent years I have begun to develop an own new approach, which I call Transformative Documentary Research, since this approach uses documentary processes. The idea is to introduce know-how from media studies into transformation projects. In particular, by using new media technologies, the actors involved can network better and shape their communication more consciously and self-deterministically. At the same time, the aim is to document transformation processes, to process them for academic evaluation, and to reach a broader specialist public. Transformative documentary research assumes that people become aware of their problems through a consciously designed media-supported communication process and can find their own ways to solve them through mutual support. The approach focuses on actors who aim to transform social, cultural, or political conditions, i.e., to improve grievance. In this context, we must distinguish between transformative documentary accompanying research that accompanies existing transformation projects of other actors, which I will refer to as reference projects, and transformative documentary research that organizes transformation projects itself. In both cases, the goal is to empower the actors involved through the development of a media communication process initiated by the documentary support. 4 sub-goals can be distinguished. First, make the actors observe and analyze their own behavior and derive improved action strategies from the results. Second, create an internal information platform that allows an exchange of information between the actors involved. Third, document the process of transformation and the process of documenting as a source material. Fourth, attract the interest and support of a specialist but broader public with selected examples of documentation. The goal is therefore not to produce a documentary film with the greatest possible public appeal. Rather, the idea is to use audiovisual documentation methods for academic research and at the same time as a means of communication that primarily addresses a micro-community and to strengthen its stakeholders through the process. How this can be implemented in university teaching. Due to limited competencies and in particular available resources and time, it was clear that rather than an own large-scale transformation project, a transformative documentary accompanying research based on existing reference projects of other actors would be the more appropriate choice. The initial idea was the so-called service learning. Students are brought into contact with representatives of non-profit projects in which they can contribute on their own responsibility. It should be noted that the role of teachers, students, and therefore also potential cooperation partners is changing, which leads to new concepts and learning scenarios. During the pandemic, most teachers and students had already gained experience with the concept of blended learning, in which teaching content is no longer taught solely in person, but with synchronous or asynchronous digital tools, from Zoom to online courses. Ideally, there would also be an opportunity for students to provide inputs themselves. In the next step, the roles of teachers and students are swapped. In a school context, this is also referred to as a flipped classroom, whereas at universities it is more commonly referred to as an inverted classroom. The concept is based on the idea that students have to research the most important content of a seminar themselves and present it to the teacher, who then takes on the role of moderator of discussions and advisor for the students. The concept of service learning, which goes beyond this, is again about a change in roles and perspectives. Learning through engagement aims to ensure the students acquire the skills necessary to carry out the projects themselves. Students not only have to acquire the most important content themselves, they also have to acquire the necessary knowledge and skills and take responsibility for certain areas of work or work steps within the framework of a non-profit project for which they believe they are competent and which are also agreed with the organizations carrying out the project. The role of teachers is also changing. They are still advisors and facilitators for the students, but are also available to the relevant non-profit organizations as advisors, and only in emergencies as facilitators or even co-organizers. In most cases, students have to make their own arrangements with the non-profit organizations, i.e. coordinate and negotiate dates and tasks. In the following, I would like to focus on two teaching research experiments that had two very different outcomes. I must point out at the outset that both projects have not yet been completed, and I am only reporting on an interim status here. Both projects are accompanying projects in which the lead was taken by the non-university, non-profit organizers. The project with the working title Kiez-Soli-Kasse was carried out with bachelor students in the Wrangel-Kiez in Berlin in the summer of 2022. The Wrangel-Kiez is a social hotspot in a poorer district of Berlin, whose public perception is characterized above all by a pronounced drug scene in nearby Görlitzer Park, with an accompanying criminal milieu, by the high proportion of migrants in the population, and by gentrification trends that are slowly driving out long-established residents through rising rents. However, in addition to state support services, there are also traditionally strong civic networks and associations that strengthen the social cohesion of residents and offer help for self-help. Also, there is state aid to cover rent and living costs, in particular the so-called citizens' income, in German Bürgergeld, introduced in January 2023. This aid is very strictly regulated. If something unforeseen happens, for example, the fridge breaks, the child wants to go on a school trip, or an additional heating bill is due, then these state transfer payments are not enough. If you earn extra money from a small job or receive a gift, you have to declare it, and almost everything is deducted from the state transfer payment. Traditional offers of help, such as donations or gifts, therefore don't really help, as a fridge or a school trip costs amount to a fixed sum. In the spirit of neighborly solidarity, private individuals and professional social workers came together around the Kiez-Anker 36, a family and neighborhood center, in June 2022 to launch the Kiez-Soli-Kasse initiative. The idea is to support people who receive citizens' income with small amounts of money, not as a gift or donation, but by granting so-called nano-loans of between 50 and 250 euro to those in need without any bureaucratic hassle. As these are de facto loans, they are not offset against state transfer payments, even if the repayment of the loans is voluntary and not enforced. So much for the idea. The result of the student project is an improvised website in which the students have summarized the interviews with the so-called intermediaries who decided on the loans.
Okay, also wie läuft es ab, wenn jemand aus der Kiez-Soli-Kasse Geld bekommen soll? Also es gibt eben diese Vermittlerpersonen. Das sind eben Leute, die wir schon ausgewählt haben danach oder angefragt haben danach, dass sie tatsächlich auch in irgendeiner Weise in einer bestimmten Einrichtung oder in so einem sozialen Kontext irgendwie arbeiten, wo praktisch auch Personen zu ihnen kommen in Beratungsgespräche oder in andere Kontaktsituationen, sodass sie das halt eben überhaupt erstmal auch mitbekommen.
Also ich versuche es mal ein Beispiel klar zu machen, dann wird es vielleicht plastischer.
Es ist Monatsende, du hast 2, 3 Kinder zu Hause und es ist kein Geld zum Einkaufen da. Dass man da auch einfach mal hingehen kann und sagen kann, hey, könnt ihr mir mal 50 Euro geben, ich muss einkaufen, ich habe kein Geld.
Und für so eine kleinen Nothilfen zum Beispiel, ne, dann können wir gucken, dass wir halt eben schnell, unbürokratisch halt eben einen kleinen Kredit zur Verfügung stellen, in dem Wissen, dass manche Sachen auch gar nicht zurückkommen.
However, the organizers felt misjudged by this website and considered it to be of little use. In fact, one can argue about the results. What speaks against the students was above all that they disregarded a basic rule of participatory projects and service learning: to coordinate all work steps with the collaborating organizations, to make the raw materials accessible to all participants, and to coordinate the evaluation and processing criteria and the intended use with them. However, it should also be mentioned that the Kiez-Soli-Kasse project also failed as a social project, as become clear from a follow-up discussion with the initiators who were confronted with unexpected problems. The borrowers did not behave as expected, but began to stalk the project intermediaries. They lay in wait for them on their way to work, camped outside the home of one of the intermediators, or spent time every day near the school building where one of the intermediators picked up her son every day. These led to confrontational encounters between borrowers and intermediators, in which the borrowers demanded higher amounts or additional services from the intermediators which they were unable or unwilling to provide. In one case, there was even a police intervention after the project was aborted. Nevertheless, the students did produce a result, and the dispute with the organizers certainly contributed to a learning effect among the students. We are now considering whether we should tackle the topic again in the form of a serious game, such as Spend, for example. I would now like to talk about the Gedenkweg Wilhelmine project, the Wilhelmine Memorial Trial, which is a project about changing a currently unsatisfactory commemorative situation in the landscape between the Bunker Valentin and the Baracke Wilhelmine in the area of Bremen-Farge. Bunker Valentin was the largest construction site of the German Kriegsmarine, i.e. the German Navy, during the Second World War, and is still the largest high bunker in Germany, with a length of 419 meters, a width of 19.7 meters, and a height of about 30 meters. It was built far from the coast, out of range of British naval guns, directly on the Weser River, to construct the new Type 21 submarine, considered a wonder weapon on an industrial scale under utmost secrecy. However, the British intelligence service had been informed from the beginning and bombed the structure shortly before its completion, so that a submarine could never be built there. What remained was a concrete colossus that still rises from the landscape today and attracts school classes and tourists as a memorial site. Less well known, in contrast, are the victims of the military megalomania. Tens of thousands of prisoners of war from the Soviet Union, France, Italy, and many other countries who had been forced to work on the construction site and were killed in the thousands. While the bunker ruins speak for themselves as a testimony to military hubris, visitors pay little attention to the suffering of the victims as the prisoner of war camps. The Baracke Wilhelmine was maybe the best known of these camps, are spread for miles across the open terrain. For the memorial work, this poses a problem that there are no points of reference for visitors who only find an open area consisting of meadows, wetland, and pieces of forest, which is also used by various actors. The question is now, how can we draw attention to the victims, and i.e. also to an open area where there is nothing left to see, however, because most of the remains have disappeared or have been overgrown by vegetation. The idea was to create a memorial trail that could use existing commemorative plaques in the terrain to produce a smartphone-based media guidance using XR technologies. This media accompaniment would guide visitors through the landscape. In addition, we wanted to verify the geographical location of the existing memorial plaques in the terrain by processing and analyzing all available documents and to precisely locate a previously undiscovered mass grave whose existence is known from records. We also decided to involve other actors with more agency and expertise in the project and to document their work. Apart from the representatives of the Baracke Wilhelmine and Bunker Valentin memorial sites, these include the German Bundeswehr, i.e. the Armed Forces of Germany, which use parts of the site temporarily for logistics maneuvers, local youth groups that use the site as a Pokemon Go arena and hiking, and nature conservation associations for whom the area is popular because of its special microbiotopes. In addition, we asked the Institute for Film and Media Studies of the University of Bremen, the group Forensic Architecture at Goldsmiths, University of London, the company Zaubar, and the company Scavenger in Berlin, the associations Avenus and Next Reality in Hamburg, the memorials Bergen-Belsen and Neuengamme, as well as Professor Dr. Frank Nikulka and Dr. Frank Andraczko from the Archaeology Department of the University of Hamburg, and Dr. Mario Palo, the responsible district archaeologist of the district of Lüneburg as representative of the Lower Saxony State Office for the Preservation of Monuments. Also, it was clear from the outset that these consultants and potential collaborators would not fully participate until a major externally funded project had been approved for full-scale implementation. We decided to use the initial contact to advance various stalled conversations between stakeholders and, in particular, various relevant government agencies. In October 2022, students from a master's seminar at the University of Hamburg started the project. After a short training in camera and sound technique, interview technique, and on the design of websites, the seminar initially focused on the evaluation of existing materials and documents. These included numerous aerial photographs taken by the British Royal Air Force and the US Air Force during and after the war, showing the so-called camp landscape, photographs of the construction work taken by the Nazi camp administration, memoirs by survivors, documentations by historians, as well as many more recent projects such as amateur videos of the location and a documentation by a television station. There is even a graphic novel telling the story of the bunker from the perspective of a photographer commissioned by the Nazi to accompany the construction project. The students were asked to submit weekly reports on their advances in knowledge, which were supposed to include reflections on new findings and work progress. Then, on January 7, 2023, we went on a longer excursion to the site during which the students conducted and recorded explanatory interviews at central event points. The goal was to use the recordings for the design of a website. First, the Bunker Valentin, second, the bunker dip tank, third, the labor education camp, fourth, the round tanks, fifth, the camp entrance, and sixth, the mass grave. I would like to briefly comment on the round tanks which were explained with the text. I quote, starting in 1939, many round tanks were built for the unfinished naval fuel depot to store fuel for the Navy's capital ships. These tanks have a diameter of about 50 meters and a wall height of 8 meters. Since the construction of the naval tanks farm has never been completed, some of the tanks were used to store material. One tank was also used to house approximately 1,500 concentration camp prisoners from the Farge subcamp. This tank was blown up in 945, but two similar bunkers were still partially preserved and visible, so that the proportions become apparent. End of quotation. Björn Hermann, the academic coordinator of the Baracke Wilhelmine memorial site, stands in front of one of the two still preserved ruins to explain the history of the place in more detail. We added various materials to the website that explains the site and the historical events. In addition to being as descriptive as possible, it was also important for us to pinpoint the locations as accurately as possible, because we noticed during the evaluation of the materials that some of the commemorative plaques were placed in wrong places on the site. The website, which is still in the development phase, will serve as a central reference point to provide visitors with important background information. The website will also be accessible via QR codes on the site using a smartphone. At the same time, we intend to use an XR application such as Scavenger to create virtual points of contact that can be passed in the form of a so-called hunt. When certain positions are reached, they will release further information or, with a younger audience in mind, distribute reward points or the like through ludification. We are currently testing these plans, and we are talking with a scavenger company about customizing the app to make it as targeted as possible. Nevertheless, the implementation encountered unexpected obstacles. A major funding application was submitted to the VW Foundation, but unfortunately Björn Hermann died suddenly and unexpectedly on April 6, 2023 at the age of 49, which not only rendered the application invalid, but also meant that an important, indeed indispensable player in the further implementation was unfortunately missing. In the meantime, at least a provisional website has been created and an initial cautious collaboration has been established in cooperation with the new scientific curator Markus Meyer. And a hackathon as a kind of game jam is planned for May, in which programmers from the Hamburg-based Next Reality Association will be invited to work together on a more technically complex implementation. In any case, the parties involved are interested in further cooperation and development of the project. Overall, it should be emphasized that this project generated more exciting interim results than the Berlin project, and that the students in particular, in this case master students, coped much better with the task, especially with the differentiated role requirements. Consequently, the interim results are also promising and can serve as a starting point for further processing steps. If I were to attempt a summary of the outlined projects, I would come to an ambivalent conclusion. On the one hand, the students acquired many new technical skills and gained many new experiences that went far beyond their curriculum. On the other hand, the students have great problems assessing themselves in their own abilities and are not practiced in participative and collaborative interaction with each other and with other participants. As a result, the projects either did not lead to satisfactory results within the available timeframe or only to partial results, which can certainly be further developed in the future. It can be assumed that it is not only media studies students who have these problems with participatory interaction, but also all other people who are invited in participatory projects. It is not enough to simply want to design a project in a participatory way by equipping all stakeholders with the necessary technology and technical know-how and letting them negotiate the design of the project through communication. Instead, much stronger guidelines, in particular predetermined communicative and aesthetic structures, are necessary for a project to succeed. However, this raises the question of what the participation actually means in interactive multimedia projects. The question of roles and role design is therefore probably the greatest challenge for students as well as for everyone else involved in such projects, and I strongly recommend that more time and discussion be devoted to this problem in advance. If you are not focused on a publicly presentable result, then participatory projects in the context of teaching projects are nevertheless a wonderful means of bringing very different people together to discuss a topic and to make extraordinary experiences. Last but not least, I myself have learned a lot from these projects about the possibilities, but also the limits of participative projects.